Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Mr. President of the Economic Chamber, thank you for the invitation and congratulations on a very successful conference. As I go through my speech, I will try and skip a couple of parts in order to give a bit more emphasis on what is going on in Cyprus now and what are the challenges post-program, given the emphasis of the speeches earlier today. 7 years ago, the Cyprus economy was shut out of the financial markets. Today, the country is considered a good example of an economy that managed to recover from deep economic crisis and recession with the help of a bailout program and certain structural reforms. However, the economy still faces a number of challenges, even though it is considered a good example of crisis management and achieving a path to recovery. In summary, a lot has been achieved, including the fundamental milestone of exiting the program, but a lot remains to be achieved. What was behind the crisis were primarily the years of 2000, Cyprus registering strong economic growth throughout those years, driven by domestic demand. The country enjoyed full employment, low inflation, and rising real disposable income. And this led to convergence with other economies in the European Union. Despite these positive developments, there were vulnerabilities and imbalances building up in the economy for over a decade. More specifically, Cyprus ran current account deficits averaging nearly 7% of GDP for the decade leading to the EU accession and the entry into the euro. In order to finance this current account deficit, Cyprus relied on foreign capital inflows that led to a rapid expansion of the banking sector. At the peak of the crisis, the banking sector was 8 times the GDP of the country. At the same time, though, clearly, the banks were not that good in managing risks. In parallel to that, the public sector had grown excessively, and total government expenditure as a share of GDP increased substantially. When the financial crisis and subsequent euro crisis hit, the Cypriot banking sector was unprepared and severely impacted. At the same time, Cyprus reached a 6.3% budget deficit, and gross debt rose sharply to 86%. That subsequently went over 100% of GDP. And Cyprus was shut out of the financial markets in 2011. In 2013, Cyprus entered the bailout program in an effort to adjust its economy and undertake structural reforms. The bailout program targeted both public sector reforms as well as banking reforms and austerity measures. The adjustments to the banking sector, so the second largest bank entering into resolution. This had a lasting negative impact on depositor confidence as it involved losses to all stakeholders in the banking sector and the bail-in of depositors themselves. We even had recent evidence of a lasting impact on the confidence of depositors. Very recently, there was a lot of hype behind a specific bank during the election period, and that led to deposit outflows, not impacting only the specific bank, but other significant institutions in the country. And it was only with close cooperation with the SSM and the ECB and certain measures that were taken by the government that these deposit outflows were subsided and confidence brought back to the depositors. The country exited the bailout program on track in 2016. A number of reforms have been implemented, but not all of them. The results on the ground proved the progress that the country has achieved, as actual results always exceeded projections by any international institution and of the government itself. Specifically, real GDP in Cyprus recorded an annual increase of 3.9% in 2017, and that's at the back of 3.4% in 2016. What's really encouraging, though, is that this economic growth is broad-based. There is growth across all sectors of the economy except two, the financial sector and the insurance sector. But this is something that we actually want to see because of the deleveraging of the country. And we would actually want to see that deleveraging continue. For 2018, growth is expected to be again around 4%, and all projections indicate that it will be near 4% up until 2020, excluding any unforeseen external shocks. The aforementioned positive developments in GDP growth with some time lag had a gradual positive impact on the labor market as well. Historically, Cyprus was always at full employment, around 3 or 3.5% of unemployment. At the peak of the crisis, unemployment reached 17.6%. This was in 2015. The latest statistic, end of 2017, measured unemployment at 10.1%, so a substantial drop. The trend is continuing in the right direction, albeit at a diminishing rate, which is also expected. Another encouraging sign is that the growth recorded is not based on unsustainable fiscal expansion or unsustainable lending, as it had happened in the past. Public finances have improved significantly. Private consumption growth is mainly driven by employment growth and rising household disposable income. The larger-than-expected progress achieved by the country has also been reflected and recognized by the international credit rating agencies. There have been a number of upgrades, and currently Cyprus's rating is one notch away from investment grade for Standard & Poor's and Fitch, 2 notches away for DBRS, and 3 notches from investment grade for Moody's. The main factors that hold back the investment grade for Cyprus are the biggest problem of the economy, which is the non-performing loans, which has been the highest proportion in the Eurozone, but only recently, I think it's narrowly the second largest in the Eurozone. But by all accounts, is a very big number and a significant brake on the economy. Other issues that are holding back the investment grade are the level of private debt and the level of public debt, even though the latter, again, is showing continuous improvement. Cyprus managed to regain access to the financial markets in October of 2017 by issuing a 10-year sovereign bond with a yield at the time of 4.08%. The latest access to the markets was last year in June with a 7-year bond, and the yield at the time of 2.75%. So overall, the performance of Cyprus has been good, but as I mentioned before, challenges do remain and further reforms are needed. The country should not rest on its successes, even if it has registered significant economic progress. And let me touch upon some of the issues that, in my personal opinion, I have witnessed on the ground. As I mentioned before, a lot of reforms have taken place, but further reforms are still needed. Some of those reforms were part of the original MOU that was signed with the Troika, but other reforms are still pending. It goes from reforming the civil service, privatizations, where Cyprus is actually now behind Greece in terms of what has been achieved on the ground, and a number of other areas. Exiting the program is a fundamental milestone. It gives autonomy on the finances, but to borrow a line from Hollywood, with great power comes great responsibility. The discipline has to continue, even without the authorities of Europe having to disperse further payments. And the discipline is all the harder because domestic players have increasing demands on the government, on the state, because they think that once you're out of the program, let's go back to the good old times. Hence, there needs to be resistance on those demands. There needs to be discipline, without implying that social policies to help the underprivileged or the ones that are in true economic distress should not be applied. It needs good management. Let's not forget that there is debt to repay as well. Once you're out of the program, you still owe money. And for Cyprus, even though the public debt managed to go below 100% now because of an intervention in one of the banks, it shrunk back to 112%. That still needs a lot of management to bring it down to sustainable levels. Sustainable levels also means, though, creating buffers. We need to make sure that the country has sufficient buffers to withstand shocks. And that's when truly we would have reached a stage where we can get some comfort. I mentioned before that the biggest problem in the economy remains the non-performing loans. This is a fundamental weight on the banking sector, on the credit rating, and on the economy as a whole. We need to crack down and be much more severe on strategic defaulters. This means legal reforms, but at the same time, the banks will need to be pushed to be more aggressive in restructuring loans. And let me make another personal comment here. When banks sell non-performing loans, it's good for the banking system, but those loans still remain in the economy. So we need to make sure that tools are there for the proper restructuring of those non-performing loans for the good of the financial stability of the economy overall. And for Cyprus, we need to continue being careful because, as I mentioned before, depositor confidence is fragile, and we need, in cooperation with the ECB and the SSM, to make sure that that confidence is rebuilt. Thank you.